BYU basketball put such a beat down on the Pacific Tigers last night, it caused their AD to run his mouth on social media. Talk about a win.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer of the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a 14-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident expert and insider, your host here on this show. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On America's #1 sports podcast network. All right, coming up on today's show, BYU basketball, which we typically don't lead with basketball a lot this time of year, but when a sitting AD calls out BYU for them being, quote, literal bags of cash, unquote. Well, we're going to delve into that and talk a little bit about BYU's beatdown of Pacific and what the ramifications of these comments from Adam Shore are. Then we'll talk BYU football. I have the definitive, power ratings of what I believe BYU needs to prioritize when it comes to the upcoming transfer portal season. And then we'll finish up today's show with another name in terms of transfer portal targets you, as a Cougar fan, will want to know as BYU starts to bolster their roster via the portal. So it's all brought to you today by our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL is here. NFL Sundays are absolutely crazy, and you can bet live bets all season long with our friends over at FanDuel on the FanDuel app or on FanDuel.com. All right, if you did not see it late last night, in the aftermath of BYU's 93-57 beatdown of the Pacific Tigers, Adam Shore, who is the athletic director at University of Pacific, threw up a tweet and ran his mouth on social media. I'm throwing it up if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're listening to it, I'll read it for you here. But, quote, says this. Quote, tough one for Pacific men's basketball tonight, ... Good scheduling lesson for future in this funny money age we're in, ... No point in playing this game at all, comma. You're not even playing a basketball team, comma. Just walking bags of cash, unquote. Whew, that's a spicy take after, sitting AD, especially at Pacific, which BYU not that long ago was in the same conference as, speaking of the West Coast Conference. You would think an AD of this magnitude, a mid-major AD, would understand what they call a buy game, what that means. Because quite literally, he's talking about you're just playing walking bags of cash, unquote. Okay, Mr. Shore, but didn't BYU and Pacific play a game that your university, speaking of the Pacific Tigers, collected, and I quote, bags of cash, unquote? That's the kind of the ironic, funny thing about this dynamic here is that he's claiming that BYU is not just a basketball team, just walking bags of cash. The issue I have with this is that we have a sitting athletic director accusing BYU of, playing by the rules. That's the biggest thing that I don't get about this. We finally, in college sports, after literal decades of building a multi-billion-dollar business on the back of student athletes without giving them a fair share, a fair cut of the, revenue that they chiefly generated, we have given ADs, coaches, administrators, all kinds of different people involved in not BYU athletics, but BYU and college athletics as a whole have gotten rich off of the sports that these athletes have played. And now when they finally are starting to get, some market share, speaking of, in the case of an AJ Dybantsa, reported between $4 and $7 million in NIL to play at BYU. Now it's a problem. I would expect that Mr. Shore is very quickly going to, backtrack on those words, probably be issuing, some sort of apology for ripping BYU and ripping the situation. Because as I said, as a guy who has worked at the University of Pacific, he took over at Pacific in 2023. So before BYU made their move to the Big 12 conference, so they were conference mates at the point when he took over at Pacific. After 11 years at Dayton, he, I think, among many out there, when it comes to mid-major programs, would wholeheartedly understand, at least I hope, what you're doing when it comes to scheduling this game. Nobody put a gun to the Pacific basketball program's head and said, you will play BYU on December 16th, 2025, or, the ramifications are this. They didn't do that. They willingly, at least from my vantage point, signed up to play BYU in the Marriott Center and, as Mr. Shore likes to say, collect literal, quote, bags of cash, unquote. I said it yesterday on the podcast that the payouts on these, I was thinking more in the football realm where it's usually $250,000 to $500,000. In basketball, it's more around $50,000 to $100,000. But those bags of cash, I'm going to keep using the phrase that Mr. Shore wanted to use, are critical to, the bottom line for these universities. And I don't get for the life of me how BYU is the bad guy in this situation. Your coaching staff signed up for this game, brought your team in, and made it a street fight. Much like some of these Pacific games that BYU played during their West Coast Conference era, that was an ugly game for long stretches. Pacific is a physical basketball program, and they made it difficult for BYU in stretches of that game. But you run your mouth after the fact, after your guys got beat down, and say that you're not playing a basketball team, you're playing literal bags of cash, unquote. That doesn't square up because BYU, as I mentioned, is playing by the rules. And these athletes, like I've said for literal decades, have been kind of cut out of the pie when it came to the amount of money they were generating in a multi-billion-dollar business. Suddenly, it's a problem, and you're going to run your mouth on social media and rip BYU. I don't know. It doesn't square up with me, but at the same time, BYU absolutely showed some nice things in that game. It was nice to see guys like Tyler Mrus, given the opportunity to step in for an ill Aleksej Kostic, step up and really show that BYU's bench is going to be a focus of this 4-game stretch against teams like Pacific here ahead of Big 12 play. You like to see that, but instead, we're talking about a sitting AD ripping BYU, ripping the players that are, getting some money for what they actually, put out on the court. And that's what we're going to whine about in this day and age. Sorry, Mr. Shore. It just doesn't square up with me. It doesn't make sense that you are taking a dig at BYU, taking a dig at the players. Maybe you should call up all your boosters that are at UOP and ask them to start contributing to your bottom line, because I would be hard pressed to think that many basketball programs, if you're going to rip programs like this, run your mouth on social media, heaven to Betsy, hope your guys, coaches have some strong relationships with other programs out there. They're going to be willing to schedule UOP and, pay them those, quote, literal bags of cash, unquote, to fill out your non-conference schedule. Or are you going to go and, pay Division II, NAIA, Division III teams to fill out your non-con schedule for the Pacific Tigers? This is a really, really weird hill to die on, but apparently Mr. Adam Shore decided it was the one to take on December 16th, 2025. A couple other notes real quick on the game for BYU, because I didn't necessarily intend to spend all this time on an opposing athletic director's comments, but we did see for the first time in 15 years that BYU had 3 players score 22 points or more. Rob Wright with 22 points, Richie Saunders with 24, and then AJ Dybantsa with 23. Really cool to see them shine under the lights of BYU. And as I mentioned, it was an ugly game for a stretch there for BYU, but the nice part was they pulled away and they made really, really a thorough win out of this game. The one thing I'll also mention is BYU's defense. It's really appearing to round into form. They use a lot of 3/4 court presses, kind of what it looked like last night, and use it to great effect to obviously force turnovers, get out on the break. And AJ Dybantsa kind of had the highlight reel of, he had that one steal, pokes it away, races down the court, a one-hand hammer, and shows that BYU, they're running into form. The bench appears to be taking shape. Tyler Mrus, we hadn't seen him make a 3 in quite some time. He goes 4 of 4, if I'm not mistaken, now from 3-point arc in 20 minutes with 15 points. That's good to see, because it felt like he was going to be relegated to maybe being a true bench player. But now that he's proven that he can be a viable option off the bench, that may obviously embolden a guy like Kevin Young to give him a longer look alongside Aleksej Kostic, who, as I mentioned, was ill and unavailable last night. But it's good to see BYU using these games, despite the fact that, opposing teams are overmatched, speaking of Pacific, to great effect, and also irking opposing ADs along the way. All right, coming up next, we'll flip over to BYU football. What I originally anticipated talking about today to kick off today's show, transfer portal, obviously going to be a topic du jour for literally weeks to come. It doesn't open until January 2nd, but has not stopped the news from flowing in. What are the position groups I believe BYU needs to prioritize the most when it comes to the transfer portal? We're doing transfer portal rankings, power rankings for BYU football, and we'll do that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast, one big play, and suddenly everything feels different out there. That's what makes live betting with our friends at FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds, literally every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment, and anything in between while you're watching these games. Live betting is best when this game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a big turnover in any one of those games. FanDuel lets you jump into that moment. Live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up or cool down, and you can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, and literally every possibility of these games that you're watching. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. It's all courtesy of FanDuel. The game moves fast, and so can you. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Woodward up in Park City. Now, as Woodward likes to say, the fun per square foot ratio at Woodward Park City is second to none. The best part is they have an all-new winter mountain parks season pass, just $499. You can ride all season long at one of the Wasatch's best terrain parks and get the absolute best value out of your winter. It's the place to maximize mountain time, easy in, easy out, meaning no pay to park, no shuttle to the mountain. Just show up and you're riding. That's the best part about Woodward. You're not having, as I said, to hike your way up to get to where you want on the slopes. And the all-access membership also, they have, it's a flagship pass product, which uses unlimited year-round fun, indoors and out, because any of you know what Woodward's all about. They've got all the action sports covered for you guys. Get everything that Woodward Park City can throw at you. Ride, jump, ski, and play across every season with unlimited access, indoor and mountain access, plus monthly perks, buddy tickets, and exclusive member benefits. Simply put, the easiest place in Utah to learn and experience your first time skiing and snowboarding, you can do it with our friends over at Woodward Park City. They have lifts that feature perfect learning terrain. It's true, they're not just all big jumps and rails. Enjoy a warm or cold beverage in the hub with a bite of food after your session as well. Can you say happy campers all along the way? And the best part is you can do it all with our friends over at Woodward Park City, just 20 minutes from Salt Lake. Woodward offers experiential learning with facilities for all abilities. Learn more now at woodwardparkcity.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. All right, my friends, we have a brand new feature with the Locked On Cougars podcast and Locked On Podcast Network. And as always, thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you are a true diehard Cougar fan, the Everyday All Access tier as part of the Everydayer Club is built for you. You get one-on-one text access with yours truly, all access episodes, an exclusive newsletter, and a 15% discount on our Locked On merch store, which we literally have never allowed our merch to be sold before. Now you can get it. Head to lockedoncougars.supercast.com to join the Everydayer Club and unlock the all-access tier. You also can find the link in the show notes below. Once again, that's lockedoncougars.supercast.com. All right, so BYU football obviously is gearing up for their bowl game in just about 10 days' time, and that's obviously going to be something we'll be previewing. But also, you're starting to see more and more news roll out about the transfer portal. Now, I'll reiterate here, the transfer portal does not actually open until January 2nd. It'll be open for 10 days from January 2nd to January 12th. But that has not stopped I would call it a flow. It's not an avalanche or a flood of transfer portal decisions, but you are hearing more and more about guys who intend to hit the transfer portal. We talked yesterday, for those of you who are everydayers, about Leona Lefau from Texas, a linebacker who's got proven production with 23 straight starts for the Texas Longhorns over the past 2 seasons. Well, he is going to be entering the portal, and BYU has connections to him, but due to the fact he went to Kahuku High School out on the North Shore of Hawaii, and obviously BYU recruited him back in the day. Well, for every one of those guys, BYU has to obviously prioritize what they're going to go after when it comes to the portal. Kalani Sitake's new contract extension reportedly includes an extra $10 to $15 million in NIL funds beyond the $20.5 million in revenue share that have been allocated under the House settlement for BYU to go out and put together their roster. So that brings me to what I want to talk about here. What positions or position groups should BYU most heavily prioritize when it comes to the transfer portal this cycle? Well, I said it in the aftermath of BYU's game against Texas Tech that BYU needs to mold themselves quite literally in the image of the Texas Tech Red Raiders. And what does that mean? Well, look at Texas Tech. Romello Height, David Bailey, Lee Hunter, I remember Sky Gill Howard, if I recall. Their defensive line at Texas Tech reportedly made $7 million between the front line of that defense. And that is money well spent, it appears, because they have been downright dominant. BYU got absolutely demolished by that defensive front. So I believe that BYU, when it comes to the transfer portal, priority number one, upgrade the defensive line to make sure it's the biggest, baddest unit you possibly can muster. Now, I also will acknowledge the BYU has a little trickier situation when it comes to the transfer portal. You have to make sure guys are a right fit for what BYU is as a religious institution. You always have to make sure the grades pan out. And Kalani Sitake, for everything that people want to talk about what he does as a head coach, he is a culture builder first and foremost. And he wants to make sure that there's not going to be guys coming in that upset that culture that he's crafted and built over a decades-long tenure. He wants to make sure that he has the right guys and the right mix of talent. And that doesn't mean that BYU is going to cast aside every guy on the roster right now, but I do think you need to prioritize that defensive line. You need to make it the best it possibly can be, because BYU has seen what an elite opposing defensive line can do to their game plan. And it's simply put, it wrecked BYU. They just couldn't do anything in the 2 games against Texas Tech. And a lot of it had to do that with that front line for Texas Tech. Next thing, so number one, defensive line in my mind. Number 2, running back. Now, LJ Martin returns. BYU is going to be pretty good in terms of feeling like, okay, we're set at the running back position. But behind LJ Martin is a whole list of guys, Sione Moa included, who have had moments in BYU uniform. But the problem is, I often say on this podcast, the best ability is availability, and BYU needs running backs that can, be available and be healthy and be nice compliments to LJ Martin. And if LJ Martin does leave, it may make this position, group, speaking of running back, priority 1 when it comes to the transfer portal. LJ Martin, simply put, is an absolutely dynamic weapon that BYU's been lucky to have. And there's a reason why he was the offensive player of the year in the Big 12 conference. He was nothing short of remarkable. He was the engine that made everything for BYU offensively work. And losing him would be disappointing, but also understandable. And it makes the running back position absolutely critical for BYU to go out and find a body or bodies in the portal that can come in and bolster that position, whether they are depth pieces behind LJ or stepping in to fill his sizable shoes next season. Number 3, offensive line. BYU is going to lose some guys like Waylon Lapuaho, Austin Leusa, etc. from their offensive front. They also lose Isaiah Jota. So there are going to be offensive line spots that are going to be up for grabs once again for TJ Woods to find options for. Doesn't hurt that BYU's got a really well-stocked young core of talent on that offensive line, but that does not mean that you can't ignore it. Much like the defensive line was elite for Texas Tech, well, BYU's inability to block that front, that was a critical error, and BYU's got to make sure that offensive line is as good as it possibly can be. Jeff Grimes, the former BYU offensive coordinator, often said the tip of the spear on an offense is the offensive line. They have to lead the way. And I think Kalani Sitake, he talks about wanting to win physical football games. You got to have an offensive line that can bully opposing teams' defensive fronts. And that's what BYU needs to look at in the portal. Do they have the right options already on the roster, or do they need to go outside of that and bring those guys in? And also, let's acknowledge the offensive line in transfer portal might be, outside of quarterbacks, the single most expensive position to acquire talent for, even more than defensive line, more than running backs. Offensive linemen come at a premium in the portal, and BYU is going to have to obviously monitor that pretty closely. Number 4, wide receiver. Chase Roberts exits. Obviously, BYU's go-to guy at wide receiver. Can JoJo Phillips, let's say that he steps into that role, then Parker Kingston continues his role as a slot receiver. What else do you have at wide receiver? Cody Hagan, I think he's proven to be a role player, but is he ready to be the guy for BYU? Do they have somebody else on the roster that's ready to step up, whether it's Reggie Frischneck, Tei Nakua, on down the list? I think you need to look at the wide receiver position and add at least 1, if not 2, starting outside type wide receivers to BYU's roster, if at all possible. I think that wide receiver position, it's proven you need to have dynamic guys who can get downfield, can get themselves open, and create opportunities for Bear Bachmeier to obviously have options to throw the ball to. It felt like too often this year it was a 2-man game. Chase Roberts, Parker Kingston, and JoJo Phillips, when he was available, I think is the 3rd guy in that unit. But you need 4 or 5 guys who are capable of contributing. And that's what they had in 2024 is they had Chase Roberts. They had Keelan Marion. They had Darius Lasher. They had Parker Kingston. They had JoJo Phillips. They had 4 or 5 bona fide options. This year, far too thin. And the young guys on the roster didn't prove to be worthy of the minutes, at least or the time that it felt like you would have liked to have seen them take advantage of that. Can Cody Hagan step up? Like I said, can Reggie Frischneck, can Tate Nakua step into those roles? Well, I think considering you don't know the answer to that, you're going to want to prioritize the wide receiver position. And then number 5 on my list in terms of the top 5 positions, I'm looking at BYU needing to use the portal to great effect, linebacker. Now, we talked about Leona Lefau yesterday. I think absolutely, if you can get him into BYU's football program, you do it, no questions asked. But beyond that, if Isaiah Glasker does go to the NFL as I expect him to go, I'm not reporting anything. I think he should turn pro. That's personal opinion on the matter. And along with Jack Kelly exiting because he's a senior and obviously out of eligibility, you have your star 2 linebackers exiting the program. Yeah, it helps that a guy like Cialia Serra is running it back, and Shea Bryant Struther, who was really showing some things early on the season, is expected to return next year. But that is just a couple of guys. And linebacker, BYU's proven to have multiple guys that can be impact players are critical to the success that Jay Hill's defense has had. So I think linebacker is the number 5 position to monitor here, and we'll see how it all shakes out. Is there a position group that I missed? Did I get anything wrong in your opinion in terms of where I prioritize, where BYU should be focusing on the portal? I will also add this. BYU should also always make sure that they look at best players available. If there's somebody out there, regardless of position, that you think can upgrade your roster, bring them in. If they are interested in BYU, BYU should be interested in them. And I think that's absolutely another thing to consider here. But there are position groups that BYU does need to prioritize and make sure that they, make them a part of what they can do when it comes to the transfer portal. All right, coming up next, a name to know in the transfer portal, and actually addresses the number 2 position that I think BYU needs to focus on in the portal. That's running back. Who is Joshua Dye, and why does BYU, or at least why I think BYU should have interest in him? We'll talk about that next as we roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Omaha Steaks. The holidays are here, and whether you're hosting family, planning the perfect gift, or just trying to keep things simple and delicious, Omaha Steaks makes it easier than ever. From effortless holiday entertaining, to unforgettable gifts, Omaha Steaks delivers the world's best steak experience straight to your door. What makes it even better, with Omaha Steaks, you always know exactly what you're getting. USDA certified tender steaks, premium proteins, gourmet sides, and decadent desserts that make anyone feel appreciated. The best part about our friends over at Omaha Steaks, it's easy to gift. Shows up frozen, packed beautifully, ready to cook, and you don't have to guess anybody's size. That's the best part about this. The steaks are perfectly aged and insanely tender. It's restaurant level at home, and they have so many different options, whether it's steak, burgers, chicken, pork, seafood, desserts. They have something that will fit everybody's palate, it feels like, when it comes to taking care of them this holiday season. Save big on your gourmet gifts and holiday favors with Omaha Steaks right now. Go to omahasteaks.com, and for an extra $35 off, use the promo code COLLEGE at checkout. Terms apply. See the site for more details. That's omahasteaks.com. Use the promo code COLLEGE to save an extra $35 off at omahasteaks.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And before I get asked about this House of Royal hat I'm wearing, if you're watching this on YouTube, is from CapX. The guys over at CapX send it over to me. They're not endorsing me to make me wear it. I just think it's an awesome hat, and I enjoy wearing it. So before you ask, go to capx.com. They actually are working with BYU Athletics to do exclusive drops of different hats that are available for, I think, 1 or 2 weeks at a time. And this is one of those. I think this House of Royal one was one of them recently. So check it out, capx.com, or go to BYUCougars.com. Go to their shop site, and you should be able to find it there as well. All right. So before we go on today's show, another name I feel like you should know when it comes to the transfer portal for BYU is the name Joshua Dye. Now that name may sound familiar, but this Joshua Dye does not have any relation to, James Dye of BYU fame, to my knowledge. Joshua Dye is from William Fields High School down in Arizona, is where he prepped. He originally actually enrolled at UTEP, didn't really play for the minors, and then ended up going to Southern Utah University this past season, where he absolutely erupted. He ran for, wait for it, 1,831 yards, nearly 1,800 yards and 28 touchdowns with a season-long run of 92 yards, and he was like the focal point of Southern Utah's offense all season long. Now, what they have done with Delane Fitzgerald down there at SUU is they have built an offense that is predicated upon having a bell cow running back who is just an absolute dynamic player, and Joshua Dye is the latest iteration of that. He's 6 foot. So what do they list him at? They list him at 5'11", 205 pounds. So good size for a running back, especially at the FCS level. And The reason why I think BYU should be considering this is that with LJ Martin's status still pending, whether he decides to run it back or he goes to the NFL, BYU needs quality depth at the running back position. Now, is Joshua Dye keen, if LJ Martin does return, to come to BYU and play second fiddle to a guy like this, or maybe even third fiddle with a guy like Sione Moa also in the mix? Maybe not, but I still think these are names that you need to monitor if you are a BYU fan when it comes to the transfer portal, because let's say LJ Martin does decide to test the NFL waters, and the draft declaration deadline is January 5th, 2026. So actually 3 days after the portal window will open officially is when a guy like LJ will have to formally declare whether he intends to pursue the NFL draft or not. Now, that does not mean that he has to enter the draft and withdraw by that date. He just has to declare that he's interested to be in the draft as a junior eligible prospect. He can withdraw from the draft. I think it's in like February is when he ultimately can withdraw, is the deadline for that. But he can test the waters there. And that would obviously cause BYU to have a conversation about, okay, what does our future look like at the running back position? Is Sione Moa capable of stepping into those shoes and being that guy? I'd be hard-pressed to think that you can expect one guy to fill what LJ Martin did for BYU this past season. That's why I think Joshua Dye will be a very welcome addition to BYU's roster if you were interested in playing at BYU. I don't know, as of recording this podcast, what interest level Joshua Dye and or BYU have in one another, but I'm just looking at it from the prism of BYU has dipped into Southern Utah University's talent pool the last few seasons and has found some really capable players. Think of guys like Anisi Purcell, who was a rotation piece on BYU's defensive front, Southern Utah University standout. Also, Kyle Safarchuk, a rotating offensive guard, starting caliber offensive guard for BYU, also Southern Utah. Oh, the guy that he rotated with at times, Austin Leusa, also from Southern Utah University. SUU and Delane Fitzgerald have done a really, really good job at finding talent wherever it may be and developing it there in Cedar City. And BYU, they've been lucky enough to pick off some of that talent, and it's benefited their football program. That is why Joshua Dye, in my opinion, would be a welcome addition to BYU's roster, because he would, I think, very admirably at least fill the role of LJ Martin were LJ Martin to leave for the NFL. And he's got the proven production now at the FCS level. Now, do you expect him to run for 1,800 yards at the Power 4 level as he jumps from FCS? No, but it doesn't necessarily have to be 1,800 yards. He is obviously, because he's announced he's going to go into the portal. Obviously, the portal window doesn't open till January 2nd formally, but he's looking for a bigger opportunity for himself, and BYU can offer just that, playing at the Power 4 level, playing in the Big 12, and they can point guys, Jamal Williams, point at guys like Tyler Algier, and then obviously LJ Martin, say, hey, you come here, we're going to have you on a career arc, if everything goes according to plan, headed towards the NFL. That you can't argue with that. BYU has put NFL running backs in the NFL, and they've done it on a routine basis over the past, let's say, roughly 10 years easily, if not beyond that. It's pretty incredible that BYU for so long was not a place that running backs were known for because they threw the ball all over the field. But the last 10, 15 years, they've really become a nice kind of underrated running back factory. And that's what I think the selling point for a guy like in this case, Joshua Dye, I think you'd have him interested in saying, hey, you come here and you play the way that we play in our offense, the way that our offense is designed. It's an NFL-style offense. It's not by accident that what guys like Tyler Algier are doing in the NFL these days. It's not accident that they have stepped in and been key contributors right away. Jamal Williams, the same thing. I fully expect that LJ Martin, he will step into an offense that runs an outside or inside zone running scheme, and he's going to fit right in. Aaron Roderick has done an incredible job crafting this offense to be as NFL-esque as it possibly can be. And a lot of that comes with conversations they've probably had, and I know that they've had, with guys like Andy Reid, because Andy Reid is one of the foremost offensive minds in the NFL. And yes, spare me the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs are missing out on the playoffs this year. You know what? That's one thing, but you cannot argue that Andy Reid's track record is, pretty dang good when it comes to offensive football. And BYU's done a really good job patterning their offense after what he and other offensive innovators at the NFL level have done. And a lot of that is making sure that you have stud running backs who are in positions to succeed. So, yeah, I absolutely think that Joshua Dye is a name, much like Leona Lefau that we talked yesterday, for those of you who are everydayers, about, as names that BYU, as Cougar fans, when it comes to the portal, You'll want to know. You'll sound like you're smarter. If and when they do decide to come to BYU, you'll have been in on them from the get-go because you've been listening to this podcast. That's kind of my goal with this podcast, is make you one of, if not the smartest BYU fan you can be. I am totally cool being your quote-unquote source, giving you the intel that when you're around the water cooler, people are like, wow, that guy really knows what he's talking about. And you know what your secret weapon is? Yeah, this podcast, Locked On Cougars. So, yeah, the latest name to file away, Joshua Dye, because I absolutely think that if and when a guy like LJ Martin decides to move on from BYU, a guy like Joshua Dye is a ready-made replacement out there on the portal side of things. The BYU absolutely should already, if they haven't, be kicking the tires on, and at least have some interest in him and talking with him about his interest potentially in playing for BYU football. So name to monitor, and obviously the latest name in terms of the portal, because the portal, it does not stop. There's just no doubt about that. So as always, thank you for your continued support of this podcast. Absolutely enjoy what we do every single day here on the show, and hope you guys enjoy it as well with the holiday season here. If you want to share with your family and friends, and, give them the inside track on what your source material is, tell them about this podcast. And as always, thank you for your continued support of the podcast. Make sure you guys check out the new Everydayer Club. Be a part of the All Access tier to get exclusive content you won't find anywhere else. And more importantly than that, thank you as always for making this your first listen of the day. Go make your second listen our friends over the Locked On College Football podcast. Your second listen of the day, what Spencer McLaughlin's doing, covering the sport as a whole, is absolutely killing it. And as always, thank you for being an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.